Hey guys, it's been a bit of a while since I've done something that wasn't, well, actual play uh, oriented stuff, and given the Shadow Walking Group 3 situation, I was like, you know what, let me bang this out because this question comes up all the time, and it's help, I've getting in the Shadowrun, I'm jamming for the first time, that kind of stuff, and what can I do? And this is kind of like what I recommend is planning for success with your game. So session zeros are a thing that I haven't really experienced until this my recent resurgence in gaming. Like back in the day when you're in high school in the basement of one of your friend's house. It was like I want to be a thief or I want to be a fighter. That kind of very basic stuff. And then thankfully in that day D&D, AD&D, not even D&D second edition, um, was really easy to roll up a character. You threw down your uh, threw down your sheet, you roll your 3d6 or your 4d6, drop the lowest, or really whatever methodology you chose to use, and you went to it. Shadowrun's obviously way more complicated than that, and thankfully in recent years we've gotten a lot more storytelling oriented than tactical tabletop game oriented, which is fine, and each person is going to have their own personal preferences with that. But the session zero is a great way to start off with just getting everybody on the same page. A lot of times people don't have groups, at least in the beginning, that they play RPGs with all the time or that they just play really anything with all the time. So sooner or later it's going to be that group's first time together as you all get to kind of know each other. So that's where the session zero stuff comes in, where we're going to talk about setting, theme, and style. And I've done this on the Shadow Walking games in the very beginnings of each of those, where you get down and you kind of just, hey, what's everybody want to explore or play around with, that kind of stuff. Do you guys want it to be in Seattle? Do you want to be Cyber Pirates of the Caribbean? Do you want to be the musical band of doing whatever it takes to make it big? That kind of stuff. That all kind of comes under setting and theme. Style is like, are you guys playing a more, as much as I hate the terms pink mohawk or black trench coat, are you playing a more loud, proud, high action, which doesn't necessarily mean combat, or are you playing more stealth, espionage? Like, what are your expectations there? Just that, again, get everybody on the same page, because you don't want to be the group that builds five super black trench coat operators that are all, you know, sit reps and sit ups, I guess. I don't, that kind of fell apart on me. And then one guy comes to the table and he's bringing a character that's rocking a 3 foot tall pink mohawk, LEDs, and, you know, goes around shirtless except for his trench coat because obviously they're stylish. And it's like one of these things isn't fitting in here, so let's kind of get everybody on the same page. I mentioned character concepts here because I don't like the idea of people coming as like, oh, I want to play a Decker. Well, that's boring. Tell me more about the who of that character rather than the what. The Decker is what that character does, what they bring to the team. But who are they as a person? It's a little backwards and can be a little bit hard to understand for newer people or people that don't really see their sheets as people until it's complete, that kind of thing. Um, I'll use Allie as an example. Uh, Allie was a concept that came up because I thought I was reading through Run Faster, and all of the cool sensory powers that changelings have access to let them interface. No, let them just interact with other spectrums than normal are neat. Things like thermal sensitivity, which just kind of like lets you feel body heat. So invisibility doesn't really work on you because you can just kind of like feel there's a heat source there. Um, or the techno sense where you can feel out electronics, that kind of stuff. So that was the concept I wanted to explore. Is I wanted to those weird sensory interpretations and the using them in the world to different effect. Nothing about them was relevant to who or what the character did. Um, as a changeling, could be could be really anything. I love the idea of, because everybody kind of has this idea from anime and stuff of like, oh, this is a cat girl. This is uh, what their behaviors typically are. That kind of stuff. Of taking that and turning it onto its head and being like, this is somebody who doesn't want this. She hates the fact that she is now a freak. It also gives great motivation to run the shadows, because here she's doing it to get the money to have corrective surgery to make herself look human again. It gives a nice little like, these are the mechanics I want to explore. These are the reasons for some of the choices, and these are the themes that I want to explore with this character. It's why she ended up not having any cyberware on her sheet, because it was something that she was looking forwards to, rather than um, something that she already had. Because you can easily afford enough cyberware to make yourself human. Like, you can fit some arms, some ortho skin, some cyber eyes, ears to replace those various animal features. But having them already would just kind of like, oh, well, all right, this is something that you've completed. Congratulations. It's why when somebody mentions the fact that they wanted to check out a ghoul or a vampire or some other kind of infected, it's like, well, how about this? How about instead of starting off that way, how about I make the opportunity happen so that it can happen for you in play? To me, that sounds like a much more interesting story, and also pulls the team together a bit more, because now it's like you've run with this person before. They are still that person. They're just this also as well. Um, but like Allie could have, she was a sneak thief because that's what the team kind of needed. She could have been a decker. She could have been a magician. She could have just been um, or really anything, you know. But that's kind of what I mean. Like, her, to boil her down into her character's concept, it was changeling, hated being a changeling, went with the cat thematics to play on the idea of everybody already kind of having that um, preconceived notion, that trope or that cliche as to what being a cat girl means, and it gave us the opportunity to turn it on our head. Um, Expectations I have listed here as an idea of where they want the game to go. Like, you guys could start off street punks in Seattle, but in reality, everybody would love to see the campaign grow to a point where you're, hopping to all kinds of locales all over the planet, flying superstars and that kind of stuff. Or maybe, you want to start off a game as a bunch of corporate wage slaves that get thrown into the shadows because everything went to hell where they worked, or any number of, here's where we're starting, here is where we are going to go. We also want to talk about communication, trust, and limitations. Limitations is the easy part. Really, just put it out there that if anybody has any topics they don't like getting into, like, the sixth world is a dark and terrible place. That's why it makes it great. So things like drugs, rape, prostitution, racism, that kind of stuff, yeah, some people may not be super into it. So just give the players the opportunity that if there is something like this that they don't want to get into, to just send you a message away from everybody else, that kind of stuff, and you just set that in the back of your mind as like, this is not a subject we're going to cross. Communication and trust are also really important to me. They're the two, like, I guess you can't really be cornerstones with only two of you. That doesn't work out, doesn't build anything. It's just two stones on the ground. Um, we as GMs have the capability of upending players really at any time we want. It's like, oh, well, your plan failed because this security guard Steve, he's he's feeling extra attentive tonight, so he gets extra dice to spot you because he just got reamed by his boss. Just don't. If you're gonna do something like that where security guard Steve is vying for a promotion, put something like that into the fiction so that they can figure it out. Maybe they run into they go into a bar and there's some workers there and they complain about how Steve has been on their asses because, have one of them make the suggestion. It's like, oh, well, he's maybe vying for promotion or something. Um, in return, we ask the players to not try to break the game. There are a number of different aspects to Shadowrun that are not well defined by the rules. And creative, yeah, I guess that's what I want. Creative interpretation of some of those rules can result in broken situations. The Matrix is a huge issue with this. Technomancers in particular. The Resonance Veil power says causes something to happen. Well, what the frag does that mean, Somewhere in there, the players have to trust you not to screw them over, and you have to trust the players to not want to break the game, because then it becomes fun for nobody. The communication is there to help prevent adversarial GMing. Like, some of those situations can quickly escalate into that kind of stuff. And again, that ruins the fun for everyone. So establishing in this session 0 an open line of communication is pretty important to long-term health. Be like, hey, I want you guys, if there's something you were curious about after a run, please ask, talk about it. Granted, you should trust your players to not super metagame something that they learned from one of these conversations, but there are ways that you can explain things without actually like giving away your details. Usually, when I do this with the shadow walking groups, after that first session 0, we break and go about our own ways to go work on our own character sheets, because Shadowrun character creation is not quick for most people. So everybody kind of goes home, makes their characters, or you guys can sit there and work with them together. Again, depending upon your situation. After that, I recommend doing like a session 0.5. This could even be just a couple of hours before your actual game, when you come back for your next session, where you work on... Let me roll that back. After session 0, I recommend them getting their characters about 70%. Things like contacts can be left off. Things like save a couple of knowledge skill points, maybe to flesh something out, get ideas from your other players, that kind of stuff. After which you kind of come back and do this like session 0.5. This is where we finish character creation, finalize that kind of stuff. Spend those last few contact points, those last few knowledge points, that kind of stuff. This is also where you can, like, if one person was like, oh, I was just going to build a Decker or a Matrix support, but when I got home, I messed around with it, and I built a Technomancer. It's like, okay, let's talk a little bit about the differences that might mean for things. I like to get a list of future contacts that the team might be interested in meeting. This gives you free NPCs, basically, that down the line could become Johnsons. They could become people they run into throughout the course of their shadow things. Maybe a Johnson's like, hey, I need you to do a thing, and this guy over here has more information. I did this in group 3 where they were doing a thing with the Yakuza and the Mafia, and they got pointed towards Big Bob. And then here he is as a contact for them to use later to get vehicles, do to get vehicles and to get upgrades and stuff for those vehicles. Because here you are a couple of runs later and you still don't have wheels. Come on, man. Group cohesion is a good way to find out the relationships between each other. Did this person work with this person previously? Did this person have some kind of history? Just a little fleshing out, little bonds, little interactions to hopefully drive the role play later on. And then we're going to get into the first run. And the first run is not about winning. I This is the first time these characters are hitting the field and these players are getting to use them. So we don't want to just beat them over the head. It's like, oh, you forgot a fake sin. I'm going to get you. You know, that's a dick move. Clearly they were intending, assumedly, unless at that point they say, oh no, I wasn't, that's, an intentional choice. I didn't want to have a sin, which is a silly idea, but you get it. Sometimes people make those choices. And this lets you kind of ease back because you don't want to punish them for honest to God human mistakes. They're character mistakes that their characters make. That's a different story. As I add a thing in here. It's about setting a baseline of language and communication. Communication is big. Cornerstone, remember. So having the opportunity to finally kick the wheels on your character in an in-play situation, you want to be able to not have those things come back to haunt you forever. You want to make sure that's like, oh, that's not how that rule works. Now I can go back and change that, because it's a very dense game and you want to give your players the opportunity to make informed choices. This used to happen when me and my friends would play card games without. Like, one of us would make a silly mistake, and it's like, oh, let me fix that because I'm a good player. Where we would just like undo a move or two because it's like, here we are. It sounds really lame to say the word practicing, but that's what we were doing. To go to like regionals or tournaments and stuff, it's like, I have deck A, you have deck B, and we want to see how they work in a metagame perspective. And then as you're both there for the same thing. You're both there to get better. So making a terrible mistake that you realize is a mistake just after you do it, it's like, no, take that back. Let's do it as though let's pretend we're good players. So then we get into our first run, which is where this language starts to grow and evolve. My suggestion is to always do your first run as a higher paying job than whatever your average is going to be. This allows you to even out the playing field a little bit and let the players hit the ground running. Both in Nuyen and in Karma, because I like to start at about 10 Karma because this allows a lot of your all of your one edge characters, the opportunity to buy edge up to 2, and then however much Nuyen you feel is appropriate. Giving them the ability to make an actual character improvement right there at the get-go of, I now have 2 edge. I now have more agency over the things that my character does because I can re-roll a bunch of failures into an attempt to get more successes. I also tell them, and I, again, communicate these things to them so that it's like, you guys don't know, when you finish the first run and I give you 30,000 Nuyen and 10 Karma, you don't know when you finish the second run and I only give you 5,000 Nuyen and 5 Karma or whatever it is. You don't feel like, oh, but we got so much more for that other job and it was a lot easier to do than this job. We communicate those things so that when the rest of the jobs happen, they're not blindsided, because again, you don't want to misrepresent things. This is about figuring out how rules work. This is about figuring out how your characters interact with the world. This is about figuring out how we interact as a table. I listed educational on here because this is the time where you're going to take notes for rules and you're going to look them up later, because looking up in the middle of the thing is it's no fun for anybody. Assumed competence is a wonderful thing. Your characters they live in this world, they breathe in this world, they exist as people who know how this world works. We don't. Thankfully, our world hasn't gone to hell in the same way that Shadowrun's world has. So while we may have some preconceived notions from other games, things like D&D, where you walk around in armor, sword, and shield all day and nobody bats an eye, when you're a troll driving downtown on your motorcycle with an assault rifle and a sword on your back, that sure, you may have licenses and stuff for that, but that knight errant security officer is legally allowed to happen to be driving in the same direction you are, to the same place that you are, or to, hey, there's a person of interest here. Kind of comes back to that setting and theme stuff that was talked about later. Uh, so like, don't jump on them when the players do something that their characters would know is either dumb, or when their character is smarter than their player. Like if you have a guy that's really into pistols and he's going into a somewhat secure facility, and you ask, it's like, are you concealing any weapons? It's like, oh well, your character would know that you could probably get away with uh, concealing one, maybe two. But if they're like, oh, I want to, I'm going to conceal them all. It's like, you want to conceal 6 pistols on you? You sure that's what you want to do? All right. Um, it just kind of comes back to that communication to make sure that both the GM and the players are on the same page. Session 2 is, in my experience, always the wrap up of the first run. Or not always, but usually it's the continuation of the first run. Rarely do I see runs get properly finished within a 4 to 6 hour time span, especially for newer tables. So, go ahead and finish up whatever you guys had to finish up. And then we come into some of the communication stuff where you want to talk about the things that happened in the run. You want to see what the players thought of the run. Not even like they probably had fun. We all hope they have fun. But as far as how some of the rules worked, how some of the rulings were made, why certain decisions were made by certain NPCs or the PCs or really any number of things. And then kind of ask what kind of run they want to try next. Because in the beginning, and I probably should have led with this, but we don't want to have a giant world-spanning campaign written out because we don't know what our players are going to want to be into. I guess I'll finish with this. So we asked them, okay, you guys did a data steal for your first job. What do you want to do for next? Do you want to do some wet work? Do you want to do an extraction? Do you want to do some sabotage? What do you guys want to do next? Give me some ideas so that we can try things out a different way next time. From here, we kind of get into what I like to call hook runs, because this is going to be where we start to experiment a little bit, which is also why I recommend not trying to write a campaign. And I hope you can hear the bunny ears in my, or the quotations in my voice when I say that. Set up a couple of different hook runs. These will be influenced by what your players want to mess around and experiment with, because remember, you have 4 to 5 people probably sitting here that all have different characters that all specialize in different things. So running the same type of adventures over and over again, 1 or 2 of the players will start to feel like they don't get really time to show their character off, or maybe you have that rigger that put all those points into driving that he doesn't get the opportunity to use. So let's go do a giant death race through the Barrens, something where it really focuses the spotlight on that one character. This is where we start to get back into the normal pay scale for your campaign and the average difficulty for your campaign. It should also be different than your first run. Like if your first run is a data steal, to go back, doing something like an extraction is similar, but you're doing something different because you're getting a person that obviously has way different difficulties that come across. We'll get back into when that second run finishes, go back and do your little wrap up again. See what people thought, see what people want to do next, ask them if they have any questions. Just kind of keep this going. A lot of times people will be hesitant to give criticism, especially negative criticism. You got to kind of impress onto them that no, this is for the best of the game. Even if there was a GM that ran L5R for me for a little while. Not for me, but I played in a game of theirs that was L5R. where they would do a thing called Roses and Thorns, where you have to say something you liked and something you didn't like at the end of every session. It, as a thing that this was explicitly stated for improvement of both the game and GMing style and everything along those lines, giving direction to where the next games are going to go. It's very helpful, and I like to adopt it for other games that I run in. Um, so we're going to do a couple of these hook runs. We have had our session 0. We had our first run that was easier, that gave us a little bit of a kickstart to our character creation and progression. Um, Now we have these other hook runs that we're going to do that allow us to try out different types of runs to see what we like as a table, to really kind of not necessarily focus on, but maybe you don't have a table that's really in the wet work, so you steer away from the wet work missions, or maybe you have a team that's not very um, matrix savvy, so you stay away from the data steals, that kind of stuff. And this is where we start pulling on those hooks. Sooner or later, your runners are going to make mistakes. Sooner or later, they're gonna make enemies or even make friends. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull them back in. You know, you could have some repeat NPCs that keep showing up. Maybe they they are directed to an NPC for some information about a run. I like to suggest them writing that character on their sheet as like a 1-1 contact, so that the players have a way to remind themselves that, hey, this is a person that exists in the world that we have the opportunity, if we want to, go interact with. It's where we're going to take some of the similar runs to what the team has already done to kind of push things forward, and where we're going to start to lean on negative qualities or uh, interactions with NPCs. To give a bit of an example here, in the Shadow Walking Group 3, there were a couple of different interactions that happened because one of the characters has a wanted by the Vori negative quality, sorry. So I pushed for a few more than average organized crime oriented situations because he has this quality that's sitting on his sheet that tells me that it is important. So I'm going to push him up against that quality and see how he reacts. If that campaign had gone on longer, maybe he would have worked into trying to get it bought off, to clear his name with the Vori, that kind of thing. So when they were at a docks doing a shady thing, and another group got introduced to being there, okay, who could this be, and what would make this situation more interesting? It became a bunch of Vori goons. Um, this is also an opportunity to where if they had interactions with previous NPC group factions, I could have had that Vori group in a gang, maybe a positive or a negative gang, depending upon how their interactions happened previously. Similarly, with Group 3, their first run was a protection run, and I introduced not Leon and not Matilda from the professional. So there's this pair of assassins that works together to perform assassinations. A couple of sessions later, their fixer has a bounty put on his head, and it's like, okay, I can just kind of have there be a nameless bounty hunter that's after him, or I can use not Leon and not Matilda to make a callback to their first session, where these guys pick up on this bounty after this other guy that they don't know is your guys' fixer, but it'll be way more interesting and fulfilling when you guys go to try and get him out from under this trouble and you run into these people that you've had previous interactions with. Um, and then they showed up a couple of times later, which to me really kind of, oh man, what's the phrase I want? It shows repercussions for the actions, I guess. In their first interaction, there was a gunfight, and then they had some altercations. It was a gunfight and a fist fight, actually. But then they find out later on that not Leon was faking his death through the adept feign death power, and they had like follow up on it. So he was broken out of the morgue as by his partner. So when they interact the second time, it's like, you know, some bad blood, which came from Matilda, who was a gnome, to like her point was you screwed us out of a job that makes us look bad, and she was angry about it. But not Leon was like it was a professional thing. I went down. He didn't cut my head off or put two in my skull or anything like that to make sure of it. And then it made the situation more interesting because Leon's coming at this from the perspective of, look, this is a job. I can give you ways out of this job. He even offered in that situation to introduce them to a better fixer for the cost of this guy, which makes for an interesting situation because you have the history where you guys were in a fight the last time you interacted. And you know that somewhere there's a sniper with a big rifle probably overseeing the situation. And here he is asking you to betray your fixer for the promise of getting you a better one. So it was it made the situation more interesting and made it feel more personal, which I guess is really what we're looking for here, which is going to segue because that works out conveniently. Oftentimes in RPGs, you will see GMs who are like, "I have this campaign." I don't like that because you saying you have this campaign means that you have this story already in mind. So what depths are my interactions actually going to affect this story, and how much agency am I actually going to have? And this is why I tell people not to write campaigns in that way. To basically the why I suggest doing it through the methods that I have just made this whole video about. Because when you make this, corp level campaign where you're kind of warring factions, stealing prototypes from back and forth, dragons, that kind of stuff. Well, what happens when your players are like, I would rather go over here and mess with this organized crime stuff? All of the work that you did is now kind of like meh, because they're not interested in it. They're more interested in these NPCs over here doing this other NPC stuff. So by not starting to write anything that resembles a campaign, until you at least get these couple of just like hook games in so you can see what your players like doing. You can see how they interact with the world. You can see what impact they have had around them through NPCs they've talked to or NPCs they've made enemies of. And that kind of stuff, like that corporate campaign of that I mentioned, well, that's not going to brush up against the Vori too much, right? So that guy's negative quality to his wanted Vori is a lot less interesting as a character hook now. Um, so I don't like doing that. I could have ideas for the types of runs. We can do that all day. That's easy. But you're only one person, and there's probably six of you at that table, and everybody is a contributor to the story. It's what really sets tabletop RPGs apart from you sitting down writing a novel or writing a storyline for a video game or something like that. So, I've prattled on for long enough. I want to thank you guys for continuing to subscribe. Those of you that are somehow the number kind of keeps going up every day, or you know what I mean. But thank you guys. If you have questions, comments, anything, just there's a comment section. So it's there, or come hang out on the Discord because I'm there too much, especially if the people at work are to be believed. So thank you again.